The morning sun disappeared behind massive alien ships as they descended through Earth's atmosphere like dark clouds covering the sky. Captain Kim Min-ho pressed his face against the reinforced glass windows of the United Earth Defense Force Command Center, watching the enormous vessels slowly position themselves above major cities around the world. Each ship was bigger than anything humans had ever built, casting shadows that stretched for miles across the ground below. The silence in the command room was heavy. Every person stared at their screens, watching the same impossible sight. These weren't the small scout ships that had appeared in old movies or the wishful thinking of science fiction writers. These were real warships, and they had come to Earth with a purpose that everyone already understood without being told. Kim Min-ho had been preparing for this moment for 15 years. Ever since he joined the secret project that nobody was supposed to know about. He had watched the stars through hidden telescopes, studied the patterns of dead civilizations, and trained for a war that most people believed would never come. Now, as he looked at the alien fleet hanging in the sky like a promise of death, he felt strangely calm. The alien transmission began exactly at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Greenwich Mean Time. Every television, radio, computer, and phone on Earth suddenly carried the same signal. The voice that spoke was clearly artificial, translated by some kind of machine, but the arrogance behind it was unmistakably real. "Primitive beings of the third planet," the voice announced with the casual tone of someone reading a grocery list. "You will surrender unconditionally within 72 hours. Your world will provide tribute in resources and labor. Resistance will result in complete annihilation." Park Ju-won sat in her underground bunker beneath the Blue House in Seoul, watching the broadcast on a dozen different screens. As Earth's defense secretary, she had clearance to know things that would terrify most people. She knew about the secret bases, the hidden weapons, and the decades of preparation that had led to this moment. But even she felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to the alien ultimatum. The voice continued, explaining Earth's future with clinical detachment. Humans would mine asteroids and process raw materials for the alien empire. The strongest would serve as soldiers in their armies. The smartest would work in their factories. Children would be educated to serve the greater good of something called the Hegemony Council. Those who resisted would be eliminated quickly and efficiently. "Your species has barely progressed beyond combustion engines," the voice added, almost sounding amused. "We are confused why you have not already submitted. Perhaps you do not understand the futility of resistance. We have conquered 437 worlds. None have succeeded in defying us." Kim Min-ho listened to every word while his fingers moved across his control panel, activating systems that had been waiting in darkness for years. The aliens spoke about human technology like adults discussing children's toys. They mentioned Earth's nuclear weapons with the same tone someone might use to describe firecrackers. They clearly believed that humanity was exactly what it appeared to be on the surface, a young, primitive species that had barely learned to leave its own planet. What they didn't know was that humanity had been watching them for much longer than they had been watching Earth. The first signs of the hegemony's expansion had been detected by deep space telescopes 23 years ago. Radio signals from dying civilizations had been intercepted and decoded. Wreckage from their scout ships had been recovered and studied. Every piece of their technology had been reverse-engineered, proved, and turned into something they would never expect. Park Ju-won activated her own hidden communication system, sending coded messages to locations across the solar system. Mars base responded immediately, confirming that all defensive systems were operational. The asteroid mining stations reported ready status. Even the research facilities on Europa and Titan acknowledged their hidden military capabilities. The aliens had made their first mistake by assuming Earth was isolated. Their second mistake was believing that human technology had remained static since their last surveillance mission. Their third and most critical mistake was thinking that humanity would react to their ultimatum the same way every other species had reacted, with panic, confusion, and rapid surrender. Kim Min-ho allowed himself a small smile as he watched the news broadcasts from around the world. Politicians were calling emergency sessions. Military leaders were making grave statements about impossible odds. Citizens were flooding the streets in panic or huddling in their homes in fear. Any observer, it looked exactly like every other world the hegemony had conquered. But beneath the surface, a different kind of communication was happening. Quantum encrypted signals bounced between hidden installations across the solar system. Weapon systems that had been camouflaged as civilian infrastructure began their final activation sequences. Personnel who had trained for decades in secret prepared for the moment they had always known would come. Operation Rising Dawn is now active. Kim Min-ho transmitted to stations across the solar system. Let them think we're afraid. The 72. Our countdown had begun. The aliens believed they were giving humanity time to accept the inevitable. What they were actually doing was giving Earth time to prepare for the greatest surprise in galactic history. While television screens across the world showed crowds of terrified people and government officials arguing about surrender, a completely different kind of meeting was taking place in locations the aliens knew nothing about. Dr. Lee? Sujin sat 3 miles beneath the ice of Antarctica, surrounded by equipment that looked nothing like the primitive technology the aliens expected humans to possess. Her laboratory was carved directly into the bedrock beneath. The frozen continent connected to the surface by elevators that appeared to be simple research equipment. The walls were lined with screens showing data streams that would have shocked the alien fleet floating above Earth. Every ship in their formation was being tracked, analyzed, and cataloged by systems they didn't even know existed. Their scanning patterns are exactly as predicted, she reported into her headset. Speaking to people scattered across the solar system through a communication network that used quantum entanglement instead of radio waves. They're only looking at our surface infrastructure. The deep installations remained completely undetected. The aliens were making the same mistake that had led to their easy conquests of hundreds of other worlds. They assumed that what they could see was all there was to see. Their sensors detected Earth cities, military bases, and spacecraft, exactly as they were meant to. What they missed were the facilities that had been built specifically to avoid detection, using technology that had been stolen from their own crashed scout ships 20 years ago. Small alien probe had suffered a mechanical failure while conducting surveillance of Earth's outer solar system. The craft had crashed into Europa's ice, where it was discovered by a research team that was supposed to be studying the moon's potential for supporting life. Instead, they had found something far more valuable, a working example of technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. The recovery operation had been classified at the highest levels. The probe's remains had been secretly transported to hidden facilities where teams of scientists worked for years to understand how it functioned. The quantum processor's energy, systems, and manufacturing techniques they discovered had led to breakthroughs that completely transformed human capability, but only in the deepest secrets of military research. Commander Nam Hyun-woo floated in the zero gravity of Ceres Station, watching the final preparations through his command center's observation windows. To any outside observer, Ceres Station was exactly what it appeared to be. A mining facility extracting water and rare minerals from the largest asteroid in the belt. The industrial equipment, cargo haulers, and processing plants all functioned exactly as they were supposed to. What the aliens couldn't detect were the weapon systems built into the asteroid's core. The military personnel disguised as miners and technicians. Or the fact that the OR processing facilities were actually manufacturing ammunition and spare parts for a war machine that had been preparing for decades. Status report from all mining stations, he requested. Knowing that his communication would reach dozens of similar facilities throughout the asteroid belt, each facility appeared to be an independent commercial operation, but they were all part of the same network.
All of us together.
They formed a military force that could rival anything the aliens had brought to Earth. The responses came back quickly. Vesta? Station reported full readiness. Palace Station confirmed that their camouflaged weapons were operational. Even the smaller installations on asteroids that barely had names were prepared to reveal their true purpose. When the time came, the aliens had observed these facilities during their initial reconnaissance, but they had seen exactly what they expected to see. Humans were known to be an ambitious species that had spread throughout their solar system. The presence of mining operations and research stations was not surprising. What was surprising was how completely the aliens had been deceived about their true capabilities. Dr. Lee Sujin reviewed the intelligence reports that had been gathered over the past 2 decades. The hegemony followed the same pattern with every conquest. They would observe a target world from a distance, cataloged its military capabilities, and then arrive with overwhelming force to demand surrender. The process was efficient and had never failed. But Earth had been given something that other worlds had never possessed: advance warning and time to prepare. The alien probe crash had been like finding an instruction manual for technology that was centuries ahead of human development. The quantum leap in capability that followed had been carefully hidden, disguised as normal scientific progress, while the real breakthroughs were developed in secret. The deception required incredible coordination. Every space mission, every new technology announcement, and every military development had to appear consistent with natural human progress. Scientists published papers about research that was deliberately years behind what they had actually achieved. Military leaders made public statements about capabilities that were a fraction of what they actually possessed. Even the panic that was currently spreading across Earth's surface was partially manufactured. While the fear was real, the response was carefully orchestrated to reinforce the aliens' beliefs about human weakness. Every news broadcast, every political statement, and every military briefing was designed to make humanity appear exactly as helpless as the aliens expected. The 72-hour countdown continued, and with each passing hour, the deception grew more complete. The aliens monitored human communications and saw exactly what they wanted to see: a primitive species facing inevitable defeat. They had no idea that beneath the surface, humanity was preparing to teach them the most expensive lesson in galactic history. The 72 hours passed like a countdown to the end of the world. When the final minute ticked away, the hegemony fleet began to move into attack formation above Earth's major cities. Their massive ships rotated slowly, bringing their primary weapons to bear on the targets they had selected for their demonstration. Bombardment. The plan was simple and had worked on every other world: destroy a few cities to show their power, and wait for the inevitable surrender. Admiral Yoon Tae-young watched from Luna Base, a facility that the aliens believed was nothing more than a small research station on Earth's moon. Through the reinforced observation windows, could see the alien ships beginning to glow as their weapons charged with energy. Each ship was preparing to deliver enough firepower to level entire metropolitan areas in a matter of seconds. Weapon systems are charging, reported Lieutenant Shin Yuna from her station, monitoring the alien fleet through sensors that were far more advanced than anything the invaders suspected humans possessed. Energy buildup is consistent with their standard demonstration pattern. They're targeting New York, London, Tokyo, and Seoul. The moment had finally arrived. Everything that humanity had worked toward for the past 2 decades was about to be tested. Admiral Yoon placed his hand on the activation key that would begin the most important battle in human history. Activate quantum interference, he ordered. Lieutenant Shin Yuna pressed a series of controls that sent signals to hidden satellites positioned throughout Earth's orbital space. These satellites had been disguised as space debris, old communication equipment, and defunct scientific instruments. The aliens had detected them during their initial scans, but had dismissed them as harmless junk floating in space. The effect was immediate and devastating. The alien weapons, which had been building up energy for their demonstration bombardment, suddenly began to malfunction. Energy readings fluctuated wildly as their targeting systems received conflicting data. The quantum interference created by the hidden satellites disrupted the very foundation of their technology, turning their sophisticated weapons into useless scrap metal. Quantum interference is active, Lieutenant Shin Yuna reported, watching the readings on her screen with satisfaction. Their targeting systems are completely scrambled. They can't hit anything larger than a city block, and even that would be pure luck. The aliens' confusion was immediately apparent in their communications. Radio chatter between their ships increased dramatically as commanders tried to understand what was happening to their weapons. The attack that should have taken minutes to complete was falling apart before it could even begin, as the alien fleet struggled with their malfunctioning systems. Space around Earth began to change in ways that defied their understanding. Major Park Sunho, commanding Asteroid Belt Station Alpha, initiated the sequence that would drop the camouflage that had hidden his installation for 15 years. What the aliens had believed was a simple mining operation on a large asteroid suddenly revealed itself as a massive military fortress. The rocky surface split open like a flower blooming, revealing railgun platforms that were larger than most spacecraft. These weapons had been carved directly into the asteroid's structure, powered by fusion reactors that had been built into its core. Station Alpha is fully operational, Major Park reported over the communication network. All weapons are online and ready to fire. Similar transformations began happening throughout the solar system. Asteroid mining stations revealed themselves as military installations. Research facilities on distant moons suddenly bristled with weapon systems. Even the seemingly innocent space habitats orbiting Earth dropped their peaceful facades and showed their true military purpose. Admiral Yoon opened a communication channel that broadcast on every frequency the alien fleet was using. His voice reached every ship in their formation, carrying a message that no hegemony commander had ever heard before. "This is Admiral Yoon to all hegemony vessels," he announced, his voice calm and confident. "You made one critical error. You assumed we were still the same species you first observed. Earth doesn't just endure rises." The words hit the alien fleet like a physical blow. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the hegemony was facing an enemy that had been preparing for their arrival. The primitive humans. They'd expected to crush within hours, had not only anticipated their attack, but had spent decades developing countermeasures for every weapon and tactic in their arsenal. The revelation was staggering. Every piece of hegemony technology that they relied on had been studied, understood, and countered. The crash reconnaissance probe from 20 years ago had given humanity a complete understanding of their systems. The quantum processors that powered their ships, the energy weapons that had conquered hundreds of worlds, and the communication networks that coordinated their fleets had all been reverse-engineered and turned against them. The aliens found themselves in a position they had never experienced, facing an enemy that knew their weaknesses better than they did. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy was about to witness the greatest upset in its recorded history. The demonstration bombardment that was supposed to terrify Earth into submission had become a demonstration of human ingenuity and preparation. The species that had seemed so primitive and helpless was revealing itself to be the most dangerous opponent the hegemony had ever encountered. The battle that erupted across the solar system was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. It wasn't just a fight between two military forces, it was a complete demonstration of how badly hegemony had underestimated their newest target. While the alien fleet struggled with their malfunctioning weapons above Earth, attacks began happening simultaneously across dozens of star systems throughout their empire. Colonel Bang Sahi had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. She and her teams had spent that time infiltrating hegemony supply lines, disguised as merchants and traders from worlds that had already been conquered. The aliens were so confident in their control that they barely paid attention to the small cargo ships that moved between their systems, carrying supplies and equipment to their military outposts. "Strike teams are in position," she reported from her command ship, which looked exactly like a typical freight hauler but was actually packed with weapons and explosives, beginning simultaneous attacks on supply depots across 17 systems. Attacks were perfectly coordinated. Supply stations that had been operating peacefully for years suddenly exploded as hidden bombs detonated. Fuel depots that fed the hegemony's war machine were destroyed by saboteurs who had been working there for months. Communication relays that connected the far reaches of their empire. When dark as human strike teams completed their missions, the aliens had never experienced anything like this. Their empire was built on the assumption that conquered worlds stayed conquered. They had never faced an enemy that could operate behind their lines, disguised as their own citizens and workers. Within hours, their entire logistics network was in chaos. Admiral Kang Ji-hoon watched the tactical display from his flagship, a vessel that had been built in secret shipyards hidden throughout the asteroid belt. The ship looked nothing like traditional human spacecraft. Instead, it incorporated design elements that had been stolen from the aliens' own blueprints, proved with human engineering, and turned into something far more deadly than the original. "Target their command ships first," he ordered. Knowing that cutting off the aliens' leadership would create the maximum confusion in their ranks, all weapons are free to engage. The human fleet that emerged from hiding was a shock to the hegemony forces. These weren't the primitive spacecraft that their intelligence reports had described. These were advanced warships that incorporated the best of both human and alien technology, built specifically to counter every advantage the invaders thought they possessed. The weapon systems were particularly devastating. Instead of simply trying to overpower the aliens' energy shields, human engineers had developed weapons that turned those shields against their users. The energy barriers that were supposed to protect hegemony ships instead became conductors that channeled human weapons directly into their hulls. Dr. Lee Soo-jin monitored the battle from her hidden laboratory beneath Antarctica, watching displays that showed the engagement from dozens of different perspectives. Every countermeasure she had developed over the past 20 years was working exactly as designed. The quantum interference continued to disrupt alien targeting systems, the reverse-engineered weapons penetrated their defenses with surgical precision. Even their communication networks were being jammed by signals that used their own frequencies against them. Their technological superiority has become their greatest weakness, she observed with satisfaction. The aliens had relied so heavily on their advanced systems that they had no backup plans when those systems failed. Human forces trained to adapt and improvise, running circles around enemies who had never learned to think beyond their standard procedures. The most devastating blow came from worlds that the hegemony thought they had completely pacified. Commander Won Seo-jin had spent 5 years traveling to conquered planets, posing as a refugee from a destroyed world. She had made contact with resistance movements that the aliens believed had been crushed years ago, providing them with human weapons and training them in guerrilla tactics. Phase 3 is active, she reported as rebellions erupted simultaneously across dozens of worlds. Resistance movements are targeting government centers and military installations. The aliens are losing control of their own territory. The rebellions were perfectly timed to coincide with the main battle. As the hegemony fleet found itself overwhelmed by human forces in Earth's solar system, their empire began collapsing from within. Worlds that had been under alien control for decades suddenly declared independence. Military governors found themselves under attack by populations they had thought were completely submissive. The psychological impact was even greater than the military one. The hegemony had built their entire identity around the belief that they were invincible. They had conquered hundreds of worlds without ever facing serious resistance. The idea that a primitive species could not only fight back but actually win was so foreign to their thinking that many of their commanders simply couldn't process what was happening. Some alien ships began retreating from the battle. Their crews, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune, others continued fighting, but with the desperate energy of beings who realized they were facing extinction. The empire that had seemed so powerful and permanent was revealing itself to be built on foundations of sand. The species that had expected to add Earth to their collection of conquered worlds found themselves fighting for their very survival against humans, would turn their own technology against them. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy was learning that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. The surrender came not with a single dramatic moment, but with the slow collapse of everything the hegemony had built over centuries. Their military commanders, scattered across dozens of star systems and facing rebellions on every world they had controlled, began sending desperate messages to anyone who would listen. The empire that had seemed unbreakable was crumbling like a house made of cards. President Han Jae-soo stood in the Earth Defense Command Center, a facility that had been hidden beneath the mountains of Colorado for 20 years. The room was filled with communication equipment that could reach every corner of the galaxy, broadcasting humanity's message to billions of beings who had lived under alien oppression for generations. Today marks not just the end of the hegemony's reign of terror, but the beginning of a new chapter for all species, she declared, her words transmitted simultaneously to the United Nations Assembly, and to every world where people were fighting for their freedom. We offer not domination, but partnership, not conquest, but cooperation. The words were simple, but they carried a power that shocked the galaxy. Every species that had been conquered by the hegemony had expected that their liberation would simply mean a new master. That was how the universe worked. The strong ruled the weak, and freedom was just the time between one conquest and the next. But humanity was offering something that had never existed before: a genuine partnership between equals. The first to respond were the worlds that had been liberated by the rebellions. Leaders who had spent years in hiding emerged to take control of their planets. But instead of declaring independence and preparing for the next war, they asked to join the alliance that humanity was proposing. They had seen what cooperation could accomplish and wanted to be part of it. Admiral Yoon Tae-young found himself in the strange position of working alongside former Rusetta's enemies to build something entirely new. The hegemony's military commanders who had surrendered were not executed or imprisoned, but instead were invited to help design a defense system that would protect all member worlds from future threats. The aliens who had once enforced oppression became advisors on how to prevent it from happening again. Your species has shown us something we never believed possible, committed Commander Vexai, a former hegemony officer who had controlled 3 star systems before the rebellion. We always thought that strength meant making others weaker. You have proven that true strength comes from making others stronger. The framework that emerged from these discussions became known as the Terran Accords, named after the planet where the idea of voluntary cooperation had first been proven possible. The agreement established principles that had never been tried on a galactic scale. No species would be forced to join. All members would have equal votes regardless of their military power, and resources would be shared to lift up the weakest. Rather than concentrate power among the strongest, Dr. Lee Soo-jin opened her research facilities to scientists from across the galaxy, sharing the knowledge that had made humanity's victory possible. The quantum technology, energy systems, manufacturing techniques that had been developed in secret were freely distributed to any species that wanted to learn. The weapons that had defeated the hegemony were transformed into tools for building a better civilization. Knowledge belongs to everyone, she explained to a gathering of researchers from 40 different worlds. The more we share, the stronger we all become. The hegemony fell because they tried to keep everything for themselves. We will succeed because we give everything away. The transformation was not immediate or easy. Some species struggled to believe that the offer was genuine, convinced that humanity was simply using a different method to achieve the same domination that the hegemony had practiced. Others worried that without a central authority, the galaxy would fall into chaos and war. But slowly, as the benefits of cooperation became clear, even the most skeptical began to join. Captain Kim Min-ho, now promoted to admiral, watched from the observation deck of the new Galactic Assembly Station as ships from dozens of species arrived for the first Joint Council meeting. The station itself was a symbol of the new era built through the combined efforts of 20 different worlds, using technology that no single species could have developed alone. The species that had once cowered before the hegemony were now standing tall, their representatives arriving not as supplicants begging for mercy, but as equals participating in decisions that would affect the entire galaxy. The fear that had dominated interstellar relations for centuries was being replaced by something that most beings had never experienced: hope. "Look at what we've accomplished," Admiral Kim said to his aide, watching a cargo ship from a former hegemony world dock alongside a human vessel. 6 months ago, that ship was carrying tribute to their oppressors. Now it's bringing medical supplies to a world that's recovering from war. The aliens had expected humanity to kneel, but Earth had been rising all along, and now it was lifting the entire galaxy with it. The age of the hegemony was over, ended not by conquest but by the simple revolutionary idea that cooperation was stronger than domination. The age of partnership had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.